All right. Well, I guess I'll start with the what happened to me the other day, which was I was sitting for my normal hour. This was in the morning, and I went to go sit, and I got a massive rejection from my body. Not the usual type of like, I want to move around a bit, but an actual, like, we're not doing this morning. Like, you do not have the capacity to sit down for an hour and be still. There's something going on. And so I wasn't about to fight that. I think there's only so much rigorous, technique can provide if your body's fully rejecting, the practice. So I sat with that for a bit, kind of did some stretches and allowed my body to move, and I found what was coming up was I was having a lot of questions about the technique that I was using, which is Vipassana meditation. And
what kind of questions?
Kind of questioning the long-term effectiveness of the technique. Like, am I going to graduate from this? Am I just going to keep sitting doing this for the rest of my life? Like, how is this going to evolve? And those questions were leaving me kind of restless. And I think when you doubt a technique and then you try to perform it, it definitely does not go well, at least in my experience. And so I felt like I had to reconcile sort of the questions that I was having, like, what am I interacting with when I feel all this energy moving in my body? What they talk about in Vipassana, like enlightenment, like that's the final goal. They basically say straight up, and when asking the teacher, they don't even conceive that you might like not have that goal, which that was my experience. And so I don't necessarily strive to achieve enlightenment. I don't even fully understand what is being asked of someone if they are being, told to have that be the final goal. And so those were questions I was having. And as I was kind of toiling around with them, my eyes kept scanning over to this book on the bookshelf called Astral Dynamics. And after about the fourth time that my eye caught it, I was like, okay, I'm going to pick it up. And over the course of 2 days, I've read a little over a third of the book, and almost every question that I've had about my technique has been answered in some capacity. And I'm excited to finish the book and see where it goes. But alongside meditation and alongside this book that talks about the energy systems of the body and how to project that energy system in order to have a conscious out-of-body experience, what are the implications of this? And this all has led me to questions about death. Like, most people in my life view death as a hard wall that they're scared of, and depending on their religion or lack of, they have sort of ideas of what's behind this hard wall of death. But I, in my experience with, suicidal ideation and really being interested in death just in general, I've sort of developed this relationship with thinking about it. And as the years go on, I don't fear it, or at least I'll say I don't fear it as much. There's certainly been times in my life where I've thought that I conquered my fear of death and then realized that there were deeper layers to it that I was still clinging to. And so I'm not really trying to fool myself or anyone here by saying that I've conquered the fear of death. But as far as I can see at the moment, it's not really something that bothers me. I test myself on that, it's like I'm in this car, like at any moment I could die. And I'm like, yeah, pretty surrendered to the idea of it. So there's something to it. And so I, maybe we can just start off with that. Like, why do we fear death? I don't know how far we'll get in making progress on actually knowing what the aftermath of death is. Is it even a wall? Because everything's going to die. So it's a very natural process. It's not like it's something to run from or prolong yourself. At least not for... You will eventually succumb to it. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
So much to explore here. So as I recall, shortly after you had these experiences, we had the Sunday Extinctionati meeting.
Right.
And this topic naturally arose.
Right.
But before I launch into some of the things we discussed there, I want to notice a couple of things. Perhaps you have the wrong idea about what you means. And I'm not just trying to be canny about language here. Like, well, what do we mean by you're going to face it or whatever? Yeah, of course, that's one possible perspective. Mostly when people ask questions like that, they don't actually have something to offer. They're just trying to be kind of linguistically canny, right? Depends on what you mean by the, or was, That's not what I'm trying to do here. What I'm trying to say is, see, we have this problem that I think is very important to face, which isn't merely death. When you get in bed at night, you are going to come to an end. You will end. You come to an end. And it's not exactly the same as death because you've learned over time that you trust the fact that you'll wake up in the morning. It's not guaranteed that you'll wake up in the morning any more than it's guaranteed that if you get in a car, you'll be coming home later. So even though we believe, we feel and probably act as if we can be assured that we will wake up, the frank truth is we face the end of waking consciousness when we fall asleep. It just goes away, right? And we have this, in the Hindu tradition, they have the acronym AUM, which stands for things that I don't exactly know, but I know what the meanings are. They are, I think A is the waking mind, U is probably the dreaming mind, I may have these two switched, and M is deep dreamless sleep. So deep dreamless sleep is something that we all experience. We have no recollection of it, except that we may know we have slept. Right? But we don't remember having been deeply dreamlessly sleeping. So that's very interesting and implies that actually we may be training for death while we're alive. We may be, there's like this sort of heartbeat thing that goes back and forth between waking, and waking has a broad continuum of states, trance-like states, hyper-awareness, overthinking, hypervigilance, zombied out. I'm just playing this video game for 5 hours, reading, which is a form of trance, watching shows, which is kind of weirdly reminiscent. Like, what are we watching shows for? What exactly is that? Is that an attempt to have a dream while we're awake? Mm-hmm. Except a dream of people we don't know about things that aren't really related to our own life, except perhaps tangentially or culturally or something. So there's all these things going on that are really very complex, and we don't think about them very clearly a lot of the time. That dreaming might be training for death is a very important idea, or that it might just be the reminiscence of previous deaths, right? Never mind training. If we've been through this thousands or hundreds of thousands of times, as is often claimed by yogis and gurus and Buddhists and so forth, then we're not training at all. We're experiencing echoes or resonances throughout the waking state and then throughout the sleeping state, both, right? So in the waking state, we're having echoes of dreaming and death, and even death-seeking in intoxication or high-risk behavior. Any encounter with sex is related to an encounter with death. The idea that orgasm is a little death is not a fancy linguistic trope. So there's a very complex array of situations going on here that I think it's important to acknowledge. Do you have any thoughts about any of that?
For some reason, you reminded me of my dream, not last night, but the night before. There was a point in which I was swimming to a lighthouse, and it took me a long time to get there. I mean, I watched the the lighthouse get closer and closer. And throughout the swim, it was like shallow and deep. It was not like a very consistent, ocean floor. And I got to the lighthouse and I touched it and I was like, cool, time to head back to the shore. And then I was back on the shore. And the people I was swimming with were, like ready to move on to the next thing. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I don't remember swimming back. And they were like, well, you did. It took us about 40 minutes and, now we're here. And they were just like trying to get the dream moving along. And I was like, I don't remember. It was as if I was at the lighthouse and I'm on the shore and there was and I was troubled by that. I was like, where is this missing chunk of time? And I think it was triggered by what you said about the dreamless sleep, I think when people one of the things that people are afraid of is that it's like, oh, I cease to exist beyond death, it's just nothing like that. That doesn't scare me, but it would raise a lot of questions, or it does raise a lot of questions. That's what lies beyond this, illusory veil of death. Like what could that possibly mean for existence? So yeah, questions leading to more questions.
Again, so many interesting things here. So my son, who's been studying Advaita Vedanta for some time now and sits very regularly, came to me a while ago, and I had discussed with him this feature of dreaming that I call a branch, which is a three-way branch. And the three-way branch is that something occurs in the dream that causes one to have either a question or a concern about identity or sequence. Either one of these works really well. And these basically lead to one of three kinds of experiences, each of which can be wildly different, though they belong to the same category. Each one belongs to its own category. First one is, so you have a question, how did I get here? How do we get back to the shore, right? And what you're having is a question about sequence. I can't recall, I know that before I was at the lighthouse, and now I'm at the shore, but I have no memory of the between. That's a problem. Why can't I remember the between? If we actually traveled back, how come I have no memory? That's the kind of thing that can end a dream, and the dream has an interest in not ending. So often what it will do is something I call backfilling, which is really important. And that's where it presents some plausible explanation, dream version plausible, not waking world plausible,
right?
For how things got here. Like why my favorite trope is, I'm running through a medieval castle being chased by a 3-inch tall pink tyrannosaur. I'm terrified of it. I'm screaming and running, and then I suddenly wonder, wait, how did I get in a castle being chased by a tyrannosaur? And then the dream will just backfill any old poetic things, like yesterday was the birthday of that cloud that hides the sun, and the moonlight makes little tyrannosaurs that become pink at 10 a.m. And this one sniffed you out, and as it followed you, and you're just like, oh yeah, of course, that's what, yes. And so the dream just keeps going. It backfills though. And then whether or not you accept the backfilling, if you accept the backfill, then the dream generally just continues. If the backfill fails, or if the dream doesn't do it well, if the dreaming aspect fails to compose it well, you just wake up. But there's a third position where the backfill is attempted, it doesn't fail, nor does it succeed, and you become aware that you're dreaming. And that leads into the broad continuum of possible states of lucidity, which is extremely diversely complex. So I'm reminded by your dream that there was a branch there was a backfilling moment. But what my son came up and said that was super mind-blowing, never occurred to me before, was every night you go to sleep, your identity comes to an end. Now, when you're really small, you probably don't have much of an identity, right? There's nothing concrete. You don't know, like, oh, I'm Nathan, who has the blah, 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 I'm brown eyes, and I'm this old, and my parents are this, and I live here, and duty. If someone comes up to you and asks where you live when you're very young, you'd probably just say, here, right? It wouldn't be like an address. So it's kind of like your mind's a lot more like the dreaming. Like it's not, it resists static identity, and it resists complex verbal conceptual explanations. It just doesn't need them. It doesn't use them. And it doesn't care a lot about sequence either, right? What was yesterday? It doesn't matter. What's tomorrow? I don't know, right? Like you don't know. You have no idea what time is because you haven't been doing this linear time sequence thing that the adults do. So, my son came up and he was like, what if you don't actually, what if you have no history at all? What if your waking mind is doing the same thing your dreaming mind does? It's just backfilling in an entirely different, more logical, more rational way, right? You don't really exist, you're confused. You're not you, this isn't here, yesterday wasn't yesterday, tomorrow isn't tomorrow. Your waking mind is just backfilling in this way that it habitually learned to do as you got older, to convince you that you have a static identity, that everything's static, all this stuff is continuous, the door is the same place the door was yesterday, the chair will be there tomorrow, and so forth. And that was very mind-blowing to me because it's one of those things that it doesn't really matter if it's true or not. It's really profound to just consider it.
That's something that's been coming up a lot for me. I mean, during meditation, so often the past is brought up, it bubbles up. It's like, oh, you didn't process this 11 years ago, here it is, bud. And it's served on a silver platter because I have the spaciousness and the ability to relive these painful events. And what I notice is as I'm processing these repressed memories, emotions, I notice how younger versions of myself present themselves in the present and have a voice and sort of act like devils and angels on my shoulder that come to influence my decision making. And so like yesterday I was running into a lot of my insecurities surrounding worthiness, like intrinsic versus what are the sum of my parts that make me worthy, and if I don't have these things, then geez, like I gotta be smarter, I gotta be fitter, otherwise they're just gonna throw me out with the trash. And
you say anyone,
yeah,
society, whatever,
society,
big
loved ones,
big other, the big
right,
other,
right, like someone's gonna peek around the corner and be like, got him.
yeah. Yeah, that radar. They got that radar gun for worthiness, and you drive by and fail.
And so, like, this question of who's at the driver's seat, a lot of these repressed things, when allowed to have a voice, they're like, finally, you let me speak, like, blah, 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 and they'll just talk, and I hear them out, and then if that meditation session isn't enough to really process it all, I find that it starts bubbling up during the day. And so when I'm finally able to release and I've sort of had a peaceful resolution, I can see the objective truth of what had happened, and I forgive and I let go, it doesn't bubble up anymore. And so it seems to me like, aware of the present moment, here I am, and I'm releasing all this past stuff. What will become of me when I've made peace with all of these repressed things? And, how will my mind choose to backfill? Because right now it's all past stuff. Or it's trying to think of the future and trying to plan.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's a very profound thing to share. Your description reminds me of a moment in IFS therapy where a protector part, quote unquote, or some other part comes forth and tells a story.
Yep.
And we receive that story in a loving and supportive and unconditionally positive regard. And then we ask that part questions. I don't necessarily like the language and I'm not totally committed to I'm not committed to the jargon, but the concept, like what's going on there, very powerful. We do seem, what I would probably call, the word, this probably doesn't matter, but the word I would choose instead of part is facet, right? Like we're a complex crystal that has these facets, and the facets become confused and think that they're separate, and they get stuck with really weird jobs over time that they think are absolutely imperative to the survival of the self. And so it's sort of like a little kid trying to lift up an elephant all day long and thinks like, if I don't lift this elephant, everything's going away.
Yep.
Have to just lift this elephant or hide the elephant or whatever it's doing. And so it's interesting that there are these facets, and that the pressure and charge and pain and shame and guilt and fear and loss that they have internalized are real until they sort of dissolve in the awareness and reception of loving, compassionate embrace.
Yeah.
So that's something I honor. I think it's very important to have these experiences, to help each other and support each other in having these experiences. And it's interesting that in your relatively recent beginnings of meditation practice, which started with a 10-day Vipassana retreat, which as far as I'm concerned is like trying to swim to the sun and then getting there, like actually making it. I mean, I can't praise the courage with which you undertook that enough, because it's you chose, in a sense, to face death while you're alive, right? This whole Vipassana thing is very similar to just dying to your everyday habits, your everyday expectations, even the things where like, am I worthy, and blah, blah, blah. The worthiness question is very complex because it has a lot to do with primarily, we could examine them in a more complex way, but primarily two gazes in the psyche. And the first gaze is the gaze of the critical self. Like, so this is, am I worthy to my own standards and beliefs and things? And then the second gaze is the gaze comprised of all possible others, otherwise known as the big O, right? The big other. And so that thing, you can travel around in that labyrinth
forever,
and just see from different critical possible gazes. Yeah, I mean, I see that you're very enthusiastic about that.
Yeah.
So it's very important to understand that these gazes light the mirrors of our internality. They light the psyche, just like a spotlight lights a ballerina on the stage or something. And there's a character to that illumination, and we feel the emotional valence of that character very intensely, especially in isolation, especially when there's no one there to help us, to encourage us to perhaps see more openly or gently. And sometimes it can be important to not see openly and gently. Sometimes it can be important to actually experience the almost surgical scalpel of agonizing criticality that comes from the gaze. Right?
Yeah, it really depends situation to situation.
But that's a kind of death, right? That agonizing criticality is a kind of a death, and we fear it naturally. It means loss of relation, right? It means isolation. Isolate, right? I am late. I am late coming. I'm not with the group. I'm lagging. And the lag is caused by charges built up. Right? I can no longer flow. I'm lagging. Just like lag in a Zoom call or a phone, you're hearing what they said, but you're hearing it from 3 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago or whatever, right? So much more to say, but...
Yeah, I mean, that lag, that sort of description of, facing death, it's really interesting because most of my life I've just been steeped in materialism. If I wasn't outright rejecting the idea of anything beyond just physical objects, I was at least just agnostic and not really participating in any, not really, I would be like, yeah, I see why you might think there's a God, you know, sort of thing. And so within that framework, really my driving force was like, I'm an animal, and what do I want around me? I want women and power and money, and like those things just made sense. It's like, of course, you know, I want to reproduce. If I'm gonna have a kid, it's got to be my kid, and it's got to be with the most beautiful woman I can find, and I might as well just get as many resources as possible. And that part of me still exists. It still has a voice within myself, and it says things like, you know, hey buddy, by the way, you know, you're, and it doesn't really have as much weight in the conversation, but it still perks up its ears. And if someone manages to find, you know, a soft spot in me that like that can kind of knock me off balance, that voice is like, okay, yep, it's finally my time to shine. Like, I'll take over. And so that, with this really deep interest in like, what am I? What does it mean to be alive? What is death? What is this situation? Trying to look outside of just that, what I call like that, the animal perspective, just sort of, you know, accumulate resources and produce, you know, trying to figure out if there's a higher purpose for humanity, and if so, what that is, and like, how badly do I have all this framed? And so I think my curiosity in death is really a key factor in trying to figure that question out, because if it's just nothing at the end, then we can just throw our hands up, as far as I'm concerned, and you know, go chase the resources and the animal pleasures. But if there's this, you know, holy, beautiful picture, and you know, I'm very happy to be a renunciate. Like, I would do it in a second. I think if I had more scope, when I was in that meditation retreat, I was convinced that I was going to be saying goodbye to a lot of my loved ones. You know, I was like, oh wow. Like,
I mean, you were being groomed a bit, but yeah.
I was being groomed a bit. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I did kind of drink the Kool-Aid, because, you know, they say they're non-sectarian, but man, they make a convincing argument for
Mm-hmm.
chasing enlightenment. But I kind of started to see through it, because a big thing that I picked up there was like not accepting anything that I can't experience for myself. That was really important to me. Yeah, did I paint a clear picture, or was that kind of?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
But again, there's some interesting features that occurred to me while you were speaking.
Sure.
And first of all, like, you know, when I say like my son is studying Advaita Vedanta, he was listening to a particular teacher, Sarva Priyananda, who's brilliant, and I strongly recommend to anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about everything, because Sarva is a polymath and a brilliant human being, a generous human being, someone who I trust, who I think has honor and integrity and honesty, and an incredible memory, reads broadly, talks with all kinds of brilliant people. And he's a fairly young guy. A good sense of humor too. And you know, my son needed a path that was intellectually satisfying, not merely you know, let's get past all this mind stuff. He needed something that he could sort of get his intellectual teeth into, and Sarva Priyananda provided that for him, which I think is amazing. I've listened to maybe 10-15 hours of Sarva Priyananda, and he's brilliant. I trust him. There's not really a lot of recruitment going on there. However, I want to touch on some of the things. Renunciation. You said, if there's nothing at the end, we could just go mad.
Yeah.
And grab all the stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Just go like ravingly, hedonistic, get all the commodities, kill and rape and pillage.
Yeah. And to be clear, I wouldn't. That doesn't interest me. Because I quite.
I mean, I was gonna make a joke about that,
Okay.
but we're not gonna play our normal happy, Darren hassles Nathan game and Nathan hassles Darren back, or vice versa. For the moment, we'll set that aside. But I have a friend who is really brilliant, and he said that he wasn't merely an atheist; he was like something like a nihilist or some kind of existentialist, where he just didn't believe there's anything at all. There's nothing. And so he told me that he had to develop his moral and ethical senses from first principles. So this is someone, let's be really clear about this. This is someone who thinks there's nothing. Mm-hmm. And yet is motivated, it's a very strange thing to be motivated to do, to develop a moral and ethical system anyway. Mm-hmm. Right? So he's not just a raging, sociopathic, hyper-functioning,
right.
Manzilla.
Yeah. But I think that even if you don't believe in anything, that doesn't mean that is the thing that's primarily at the driver's seat of, controlling your feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, we agree. But let's be clear. Humans often pose the situation as if there's no reason for moral or ethical concern or behavior unless there's an accounting game at the end of the road.
At the end of the road,
right?
Yeah.
And that's not true. There's nothing true about that. That's that buys into the accounting game at the end of the road gambit, mm-hmm. right? So the only reason to have moral or ethical concerns is if there's an accounting game. If you get something or something's taken away from you at the end or even during the game. Mm-hmm. And this presupposes a very strange situation that I don't trust at all. I don't think it's anything like what's going on. Because I think part of what's going on it's not a matter of what you get or what is taken away. It's a matter of the richness or poverty that you experience of being, relating, knowing, learning, touching, kissing, dreaming, creating, imagining, playing. It's that. Even if there's nothing, and this is all empty, right? There's still this richness that we participate in the fertilization and conception and embryogenesis and birth of during every moment of our lives with the world, the sky, other beings, the history of organisms, the history of minds, all these things. So even if there's nothing at the end, it just goes under a screeching halt of zippity pop, right? It would still behoove those of us who are complex enough to feel and to understand feeling. And look, we're not making up this emotional stuff. This isn't an invention, mm-hmm. okay? I want to be really clear about that. This emotion is a kind of energy in beings, in motion, between and among and above and before and after them. So that's a dance we're all participating in, even if there's nothing after life, which I think is impossible. But let's be a little weirder about the afterlife thing. And so if you'll bear with me for a moment, and I'm going to give you, let's just have
I have nothing to say. So
okay, all right, great. I wanted to check and make sure I wasn't just hogging the airwaves here as I want to do if not interrupted. So I want to touch on some stuff that we talked about in the Extinctionati meeting last Sunday, just to recap it since it didn't get recorded, but also to revisit it. Before I do that, though, I'm going to say something that came to me now while we're talking now about this thing. And it has to do with a topic that came up in the meeting, which is that I think we might have life and death backwards. In the sense that actual liberty is to not be incarnate, and complete freedom and joyful wonder and play, which we hear. That's not the only story from the near-death experiencers, but it's a lot.
It's the most
very common. Yeah. And even the people who are like, no, I went to hell, it was terrifying, I'm not even going to talk about it, it would scare you so bad that it'll ruin you and you'll have nightmares for the rest of your life. Even a lot of those people many of them have a sudden inversion of that experience. Like the experience starts out that way, and then something happens, and it inverts into paradisical adoration and love. But here's what I'm thinking. What if what we call life is actually the slow drip? What if the vitality of our life, mind, joy, and excitement and enthusiasm and play and adoration, hope and faith, love and creativity and all these things, what if that's the slow drip of death into our incarnation? What if we got it? What if we really got it backwards, right? What if death is the sunlight, right, that is just shining inside our incarnation? We're like, no, don't bring the sun up. No, please keep the light away. Like, I can't handle it. Because really, when I had the experience that I refer to as toy maker in my science fiction language, it was the sudden onset of a beauty so lethal that were it to reveal more than the tiniest shred of itself, I would be obliterated by ecstasy, right? And then I suddenly realized that what some people might have meant by the fear of God wasn't like God is terrible and judgment and blah, 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 which is how it seems, especially in Christianity and Islam, things like this. No, it was this entirely the opposite thing. Even though Toymaker said directly when we encountered each other, I am not God. I don't think he meant like, I am anti-God. I am the not God. I think he meant like, don't be confused. I'm not the being that dwells in unity. I'm just an emissary. Let's be friends and blah, blah, blah. I think that's what was going on. I can't be sure. But anyway, my point is like, wouldn't it be weird if everything that's beautiful and exciting about life is actually the gentle imposition of the before of incarnation and the after of incarnation, and that sort of that sort of scintillating inward like sky, nebula, galaxies, stars above and before life and birth and all those things. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't that be amazing? Like if all of the features of life that we most adore and cleave to and think like, oh, I don't want to lose this, I don't want to lose it, don't want to lose it, are actually the hint of its complete disappearance into ecstatic communal beauty, right? There's just the hints. There's these little sparkles, right? Like shooting stars falling into each moment, shooting stars of death light, right? Mm-hmm. And we're like, no, don't let me, I've got to cling to this body thing, right? Don't let me. But it's because the distance from death gives us that incredible capacity for what we think of as enjoyment, right? It's just like the same thing about like if you fast for a long time, the food becomes really tasty. If you live for a long time, the death becomes really amazing, right? So it's like, really, we don't want a long life because we're afraid of death. We want a long life because we want an amazing, like, rich death that's just redolent with astonishingness. And this is something that's never occurred to me before, so this is a beautiful moment in my own, considerations of these matters. Feel free to opine in any way that feels appropriate.
I mean, it's interesting because I'm combining that with the widely held belief that there's multiple lives, and there's this karmic energy. It's like, even upon death, people aren't ready to be completely released into that, and so they must go lifetime through lifetime through lifetime to give up sort of the material clinging. And I think the language is sloppy there, but it kind of that narrative is interesting to me.
I get that narrative totally makes sense to me, the karma and things, except that karma is a very complex thing. It's not like we in the West think. It's not like you do bad stuff, then bad things happen, you get attachments, and then you get stuck, and you got to be reborn, to reprocess, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not really, I don't think it's much like that in the actual, you can hear people like Priyananda talk about this, and that guy knows, everything a lot anyway about the topic. So yeah, I think we're probably confused in the West about what this karma thing is. Mm-hmm. But essentially it's something like cause and effect. So you can't do something without another thing happening. So if you cease from having causal imposition in your timelines, then there's this sort of like imagine an octopus with billions of tentacles, and it just sucks them all into itself, and it starts glowing and vibrating, and then it just goes like poof, and there's like a nebula there or something, right? No more octopus. That's the sort of thing that I think was meant by enlightenment, right? You just draw back and dissolve all of these karmic threads. And that can be a linear process over time. And this is just my, I'm not a genius about this. I don't know. And I have, karma, and I have an ego and all this stuff. I'm not an enlightened person. I'm a seeker. But yeah, this is mind-blowing. So I'm imagining that the joy in life can be understood as the gentle sparkles of the waterfall of death flowing into each moment, which is just such a mind-blowing metaphor and analogy for me. I love it. But I want to, if it's okay, I'm going to revisit some of the topics we spoke of during the Extinctionati meeting. So the first one was we might have life and death backwards, right? We should be fearing life, because it's only when you're incarnate that you face all these bizarre, conflicted, twisted, tangled messes of conceivable pain and suffering and attachment and so forth.
And it may not even be the incarnation itself, but the relationship to it.
Absolutely. And then I spoke of a variety of things, like the idea that a birth is basically the opposite of a kid with a kite, right? It's like the soul, which I think of as a web of beings, and more like a solar system model, where there's like a central figure, and there's all these constellations of past and future intimate relational beings around it, animals, living places, the sky, our ancestors, our progeny, all these beings, right, in a sort of galaxy of relations. What if the soul isn't a single thing the way we think of it? I think it's important to think this way. Like, what if all past lives are yours, but they're uniquely yours? So there's a structure of what we would call near neighbors that shows up as Nathan's soul, and there's a different structure of near neighbors that shows up as Darren's soul. And if we were to do a past life regression, what you would find would not necessarily be your previous incarnation, your single possessed thing.
Not like a linear timeline.
Right. It would be the nearest of the near neighbors of the constellating elements that emerge as your soul structure in your births, right? So that's one thing. But yeah, the idea that like the soul casts sort of a fishing lure down into time space, and that fishing lure, it's the opposite of a kite or a helium balloon, right? It's like it's gonna instead of making something that floats up and is light and flies, it's gonna make something that's super heavy and just sinks all the way down into material reality. And then there's this two-way transmission between both features, which you could imagine is like your waking life is like, let's get really into this, structured, I'm going to move the rock, I'm going to sculpt the diamond, let's make the musical composition. And then at night it's like, let's float and swirl and form nebula and galaxies, and we're just going to do all this amazing blah 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 stuff. And so there's this back and forth, right? The soul instructs the material being, and then the material being transforms the potentials of the soul outside of time and incarnation. And something like this seems so much more likely, much more like what is almost certainly happening. Like, we can't know. I think it's actually impossible to know what incarnation is, or what the beyond of incarnation is. But if we're going to think about it and we're going to have fears and concerns and stuff, let's at least do it like a group of science fiction authors, right? Sitting down at the table going like, if I was making something like, I'd get really creative, right? I'd be like, let's have some good stuff, Yeah. And I think the universe is way more astonishingly intelligent than anything the humans think. So let's get outside the boxes of our fears, outside the boxes of our narratives, including the stuff from the yogis and the gurus, because that stuff is very compelling, right? It's really sticky. The karma and the, past lives and all of that. I think if we were, and I remember somebody went to, a long time ago when I was probably like 33 or something, I went to, Michael Harner came to town. He was an anthropologist in the 50s who went all over the place to indigenous cultures and studied what they had in common with each other about their shamanic practices and so forth, right? And he produced this condensation of what he learned that he calls core shamanism, which are practices shared by nearly all indigenous shamanic cultures or shamanic practitioners in various parts of the world that he visited. Obviously, he didn't visit all of them. So it's a sort of a summation, right? And then a derivation of specific practices. And so I went to this seminar and he taught. I managed to get his attention, which was amazing because there was like 300 people there, and it was very wooish, right? There was a lot of people wearing feathers and stuff, which I'm not casting shade on, but I felt like I was kind of wanting some more serious, less Halloween-y stuff, and I managed to get his attention, thankfully, early on when he asked for a volunteer. So I got to work with him one-on-one a couple times during the session. He paid attention to me thereafter as well. That's just, I'm not trying to brag, I'm just saying I got some close attention from him. I got to interact with him directly. And he taught us essentially 4 things. How to travel to the lower worlds where you find your animal companions. How to travel to the upper worlds where you find your teaching guides. How to read a stone in an oracular way for someone who comes to you, right? They have a question, you have them go find a stone and bring you the stone, and you read the stone to them, much like you might read a dream. And how to dance the animals that you encounter in the lower world, and then also how to go for another person to the lower world and find one of their animals and bring them back to them. So you can see that he's like, there's an upper world, there's a lower world, there's the reading of the stones, there's the dancing of the animals. There are these things, right? In the same way that the guru might say, for example, you have past lives, there's karma, you're going to be reincarnated, blah, blah, blah. But one day, not too long ago, a close friend of mine, when he was on his last legs, right? He was dying. One of my friends came to hang out with him. She knew him somewhat well. And, got him to sign my Way of the Shaman book over there before he died. Anyway, she went to him and she said that she was there one time when he was talking with his partner, his wife. And she said something about, the lower world where the animals are. And he turned to her, and they had a sort of a conspiratorial moment. And he said, there really isn't any lower world, right? Like, that's just something we use so people can think about, so they know because they're going to try to understand what to do. Mm-hmm. And she was like, yeah, of course we talked about this. I remember this. But when they were having this conversation, him and his wife, they weren't really talking to each other, right? They were talking to each other for the sake of the people who were there, mm-hmm. right? And he was like, this lower world stuff, that's not really true. Right? And what he means by true could be very complex, and I don't know what he actually said. I'm paraphrasing wildly. But I suspect that it's important to realize that teachers produce as if figures and models for us, because they know we want something to sort of cling on to, a structure, a ladder to climb, or something like this, a gulf to swim across to the lighthouse and then come back, right? And then well, I did swim back, right? I did come back over the gulf between here and the light. There is no gulf between here and the lighthouse, Nathan. But yes, we did. If you really need to be reassured, we'll tell you that we did the swimming. It took about 40 minutes, right? There was no gulf, right? But so you can see how beautiful the way the mind works to give us the structures that the thinking in the waking mind wants really desperately, because it's kind of clingy and likes structure. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if really karma and past lives and stuff are a little bit like that. But I did talk to a man who claims to have both. It's a very strange claim to make, but I don't doubt him. He claims to have experienced enlightenment and also to have sort of tapped others in such a way that they experienced immediate enlightenment. And what he said was that after his experience, he had a lot of trouble with specific deaths that he had undergone previously. One had been a murder at a lake that he described in great detail, and these things acted sort of as weights, right, as like gravity wells for his that inhibited the full liberation of his being, right? These unprocessed agonic deaths that resulted in pain and resentment and feelings of victimization, or possibly the opposite, where he had done something horrific, or although I don't recall if he actually said that, I just know that it could go either way. Okay, a few more things. We might have death backwards. Death might be the liberation. I think the soul kind of casts this weird, like the picture of a kid with a kite is just the perfect opposite. Just invert that, and you've got this beautiful, where the kite is like a 9 billion pound weight, right? And there's a tiny little barely thread that connects it to the soul, and there's all these transmissions back and forth across that inform the weight and the soul. And wherever the soul is, right, it's changing the universe up there in the same way that the soul is changing the world down here as we're interacting right now. So like, if what I'm saying is true, then we're actually speaking from within that very process of this back and forth. Like the soul's going like, yeah, I'm just dripping little droplets down there into you, and they're coming out of you, and the insight, blah, blah, blah. So there's something kind of beautifully, we're accomplishing what we're speaking about in a weird way right now, I think, if we're lucky. And then, the idea that the soul isn't singular, that all past and future lives are yours, they're just uniquely yours, which gets us back to the idea of unity and communion, right? This is all one being. It's all one family, one being, one origin, here always. I am divided for the sake of love, is a quote from Aleister Crowley, a man who's, questionably confusing but also brilliant. This is what was shown to me. Why would the being that dwells in unity shatter itself into trillions of little stars? Well, the reason it might is because all those different little stars in their seeming isolation can have unique experience, and then when they come back together, they share all that experience, and they re-explode and get new unique experiences that are even deeper and richer, and then they come back together, and so forth. So really, it's about reunion, but you can't have a reunion if you don't have the distinction first. And with Tyler and so on, we talked at length about situations where, like the dandelion toy, where everything is like a strobe light that goes faster and faster. It's expanding into distinction and then collapsing to perfect unity. The information is shared, expanding back into distinction, collapsing to unity. And it looks like it's always distinct from our position, but perhaps from the position of death, it's always one, right? Or it's the shadow of the distinction inside the one, so that the unity is the primary felt sense, and the distinction is sort of the dreaming aspect, right? So many beautiful things here. And then one of the members of the group, Ms. M, talked about the death of a family member and how she was intimately aware. She was with that family member before he died. She was intimately aware of his death process. There was do you recall some of the story around this? I wish I could remember what she said before of the death. But after the death, she talked about two things. One was the deep felt sense of the presence of this ancestor. I think it was paternal grandfather, possibly maternal grandfather, probably paternal. Deep felt sense of the presence of this ancestor with her. a poltergeist moment in a house where a lampshade was shaken around with extreme violence in a room in which there's no wind. And then visiting a psychic and just asking the psychic a single question, like, do you see anyone around me? And the psychic just going like instantly, yes, your paternal grandfather, he's there. And then something about either a close family member or a very close friend giving birth to a child or two children that had all kinds of qualities and went to the same school or something that one of the grandparents went to, his wife or something. Yeah, as if the soul had disappeared from around her and reappeared in incarnate existence, which, you know, is the kind of story we hear very regularly. And then I mentioned this rather bizarre but interesting film called Into the Void that sort of orbits some of these topics of, in a rather dark way, I think, of death, the between, sort of the limbo, right? Death, limbo, sex, reincarnation, death, limbo, sex, reincarnation, and how these things are linked.
Yeah, you've basically taken the magic eraser of insight and scrubbed my brain clean. Got just become a sponge myself.
Well, let's chase some questions. Let's pop up some questions.
Jeez, I mean, once you get to playing around with like you're both unity and divided at the same time, and you know, it just becomes such like a cause and effect comes into question, time, free will, it all dissolves.
Okay, but let me just ask you something.
Yeah.
You keep saying this thing that you've been saying since we met, and we met in a very unique way, and I felt an immediate affinity for you. A lot of the time when people came to me with a similar, they came in a similar way to me and want to contact and whatever, I felt very reticent. But when you and I first spoke, I immediately felt like no reticence. I was like, One of my friends, Monique, talks about navigating by a sense she calls the absence of no. Mm. And that's exactly what was going on with us. I was like, there's no. I don't feel any no. Mm-hmm. So that meant yes, right? It's not like I felt like yes. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any no. But just understand something really weird. You talk regularly about the synchronicity. You did it about the book, right? Yeah. The synchronicity that happens where you're starting to have a question or a concern, or you're feeling like pent up or frustrated or something's wrong, and then naturally the world starts, you and the world, right, start relating in such a way that there are these events that we could think of as, quote, synchronicity, unquote, yep, that speak to you and guide you and feel like your desire is changing the possibility landscape that you're traveling through as you're traveling through it, and there starts to be this two-way communication.
Right.
And then, you find that uncanny in a way.
I mean, it's very new to me, and as I develop a relationship with it, the more I realize it's constantly going on, and sometimes I'm so steeped in it that I don't even have a sense of self.
Yeah, but this is an argument for exactly what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. You're just from one perspective, that's merely your sort of harmonizing with the unity, right, from the position of distinction, mm-hmm, right? So there's this, I love doing this. This feels wonderful, right? It's this, there's this snake-like movement of the fingers through time, right? And so you can see that what I'm suggesting, it's not an explanation for the experience that you've described, but it's a way of shedding some light on it. Mm-hmm. And it's natural. And what I was going to say was, when you and I are goofing around and we just start like kind of giving each other shit or playfully making up stuff like we did about when I was playing the British, I came in the room and you're sort of gazing at one of the bags, and I played the British broadcasting guy. When we're doing that, there's something really weird that goes on. It's very nourishing. It's not ordinary. Someone could say, oh, they're just being goofy or they're just playing. But think about how incredibly entertaining people find all these little TikTok videos and stuff where people are really just goofing. Why is that so entertaining? Why is the goofing so entertaining? And it is very entertaining. I think it's much more entertaining when we engage in it together. Maybe that's why it's entertaining, because when people see others engaging in that together, right, they imagine themselves engaging in that with someone they're close to, engaging in the goofing around that you and I share. But that goofing around is very kind of sacred. It's very holy, because in a way we're both enacting our individuality while we're giving it up and coming together in this third mind that is ecstatic in the sense of not trapped, untrapped-like. We're playing outside the boundaries of our persona and our personality and stuff. And that might have something like death and comedy could be a topic that really is important, right? Death and play. Mm-hmm. These things occur to me as I'm starting to think about how it is that we come together in play and comedic experiment, right? Improvisatory comedic experiment. But also with you and I, like musical experiment, linguistic experiment, poetry and music and stuff.
Yeah, it's strange, I've been wondering, like, there are times in my life where I've just felt so free and so, like, at liberty to just have fun, but I spend so much time thinking about how to solve the problems of the world. It leaves no room for any sort of, like, joy or playfulness to arise. It's like, yeah, but, like, think about the seriousness of this, and I'm wondering about that, because here we are talking about souls and sort of this concept, which maybe it's the concept of self that's I'm struggling with, but just like of souls and togetherness and unity and trying to figure out, like, why is there so much suffering? Why am I so sure that I need to solve these problems? If all of this is just one big play, not a simulation, not like and then of course you get into like the simulation of what, but what I mean is, like, if we're doing this expansion unity thing, then all of this is one big play. And it's
not necessarily.
Well, so then, yeah, I mean, this is kind of where things become sticky for me, because I spend a lot of time thinking, like, oh my God, like, I have to align myself with the highest of morals so I can navigate this terrain and, like, bring peace, and that to me does not, it's not playful. It's not joyful.
So let me see if I can reflect back to you something about what you're saying. See if I've heard you.
Sure.
So you're saying, the play, it's fun. I love it when we do this. But I feel really compelled to pay very close attention to the fact that the world is filled with injustice, wrongdoing, suffering, apocalyptic cascades of probable annihilation. The ecologies are being slaughtered, etc. Right? The humans are being tormented. Most of them live in abject poverty and agony and death and war. And so I feel like that's so motivating that there's no, like, play should really be off the table until we rescue the planet.
Right.
And I also feel called, I'm speaking from my understanding of what you're saying, to a kind of a messianic purpose, which is like world saving. Like, we gotta save these people. We gotta rescue the world. We have to ensure that the future can keep being a future. Something like this.
The longer I'm left alone, typically, the more I feel like I'm preparing myself to be the best vessel of change that I can be, so that when I'm released back into the world, I can solve the most problems and be the kindest and most compassionate I can be. And that sounds nice, but internally, it's like I'm putting myself through the fire so that I can take other people out of the fire. Yeah, and I don't feel any of that joy or playfulness, and so maybe it's not the way I'm going about things is too serious.
Okay, slow down. So first of all, whenever I invite you to play, you show up immediately. You're ready to play every single time so far. And similarly, if you invite me to play, I play. But there's a bunch of things that might not be obvious to you. Things having to do with life path, things having to do with life phase. Like you are in the phase just post-adolescence, right? And one of the things that happens at the end of adolescence, right about the end, is we start, and this is why I think it would be helpful. I'm just going to mention this novel, Protector, by Larry Niven, because it's very relevant to this so relevant to this topic and brilliant. I love it. Spock is the hero's name. He's a Pack, which is alien species. But, okay. Right around the end of adolescence, what starts to awaken in us is a feature of our humanity, our masculinity, and our femininity. Like they're uniquely embodied. This feature is uniquely embodied in the masculine and feminine context. And of course, each masculine person, it's not like bipolar is what I'm trying to say. Everyone has a complex array of these qualities, masculine and feminine, so to speak. But what starts to arise is an urge to protect. And at first, you probably have already developed the urge to protect your siblings, your mother, your father, your home. But what starts to happen at the end of adolescence is that starts to spread out naturally. Except for most of human history, the one thing that was absolutely impossible was that it could spread so broadly as to the world. There was no such thing as the world. Rather, the world was our world, between that mountain and this river and that forest, our world. And for each of the peoples, the world was a living place. It was bounded by certain features. This is our world. It wasn't the planet. Right? I'm not even sure if they had an idea there was a planet. It's not clear to me. So what I'm trying to say is, you and I have come up in an age where we are capable of thinking of the world. And what happens is naturally the protection that the protector feeling we would have had for our people, our place, is expanded to a scope that's unimaginable.
Yeah.
It is essentially expanded to the everything.
Yeah.
Literally. The everyone.
Yeah.
Every animal, every plant, right? Everything. And that's a hard burden to carry, but what I want you to just recognize, what I would like for you to recognize, or what I'd like to highlight, is that this is a very conflicted process. It happens, it's part of your life phase development, I think, in most of us. I went through it, and it was crippling. It was totally crippling. I had panic disorder. I was like, there's nuclear weapons. I can't protect a shoelace. There's nothing can be protected because there's nuclear weapons and there's these people with a finger on a button where they're just going to wipe out everything, right? So at the same time that my desire to protect expanded to the world, there was a threat that was unapproachable to the everything that you couldn't do anything about effectively as a 20-something-year-old kid, as I was. Not that you're a kid. So my point is to pay attention to these things and also realize that these are natural parts of our developmental arc. And I am the same way. I also have, still at 60, the urgent feeling that we must do something to stop the humans. We have to stop the humans. Like, if we could just get them to stop doing things, right? Just stop doing things, which I think the Earth has sort of gotten in on this game and is trying to get the humans to stop doing things in various ways.
Yeah.
One of the things I think she has done is turn the volume down on go to work. Yeah, you go to work, right? So people are just like, I'm not going to work. Fuck that. I'm not going to work, So it's not just you and me. This is an entirely natural part of our developmental arc and is also a natural part of our interiority. We feel the pain of the world. We feel the urgency to protect this beautiful living place that is my mother, my daughter, my origin, the most adored, the most precious of all possible worlds is this one right here. I adore her without reserve, in a way that's impossible for me to even describe, even though, throughout many parts of the day, I'm busy just going, I'm going to have hamburger now. Oh, I think I'll make the bed. Here, I will, write the essay. I'm going to make the recording with Nathan. I'm going to call so-and-so. I'm living my human life. But underneath all that, I want this world to thrive in beauty forever. People are like, well, the sun's going to die. That's not what I'm talking about. And they also say other stupid things like, you can't wipe out life on Earth. She's really resilient. Those people don't know what they're talking about either. There are ways to kill the planet. The same way there's ways to lyse a cell. Mm-hmm. It was Lewis Thomas who once said that Earth's very delicate, and he impressed this on me deeply. What it most resembles is a single cell floating in time-space. And I would, expand on that and say something more like, I think the solar system resembles a cell, and the Earth resembles an organelle, but that organelle has a membrane, and that membrane is delicate. If you lyse that membrane, it dies. Mm-hmm. And even if it doesn't die all the way, it can effectively die. If you can make I'm not going to say how to wreck it. I know how to turn the switch off. Mm-hmm. But yeah, these are natural feelings. I honor them. Give yourself a little bit of space and credit. You're not alone. These are feelings we all experience. I have them. They are urgent in me. Even in people like Amon Hillman, he has his own unique embodiment of crush the prisons, free the people, let them know what it means to be human again and stuff like that. That's all natural to those of us who are concerned with the suffering of others. So those are beautiful things. No need to feel trapped and compressed by them.
Yeah.
And you will find ways, like even today, you went on a journey to explore one way in which you might have an effect. Turned out this one probably isn't the one you're going to chase, but you'll continue to do that, and you may find a context or multiple contexts that you can interact with that do allow you to enact these concerns. You may also invent one.
Yeah. I don't think I currently possess the skill set to do such a thing.
I think you do.
Well, I think that's really what I'm seeking. Is it's like I just.
We discussed this before you went to Vipassana. Like if we could do this thing, right? Remember we had some models of what we could do together.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to do it by yourself. You can find 2 or 3 other people.
I don't think anyone should do it by themselves.
Well, some people are going to, kind of. Mm-hmm. In a way, your dad does, although he does it within a specific established cultural context.
That is, the organizations and companies are built by other people. It's impossible to do anything alone in my eyes.
I don't know. I don't get that impression at all.
You would die without other people. All the food that's in your fridge.
Well, it just depends on what you mean by alone. But I get you.
Well, I just mean like
you can forge a way by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if it's a very small way.
I have no interest in doing that. I much prefer to work with other people. I just think there's so much more power behind that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I agree. I'm just trying to say like we can establish a seed around which others gather and form teams and go after, goals.
Yeah.
Right. And that's all I'm trying to say. Okay, let me be more clear. The off the shelf solutions are not the only thing. Like, there's a different. You can go to the library, right, or you can write a book. Mm-hmm. But you can write a book.
Right.
So that's all I'm trying to say. And I'm not trying to convince you my perspective.
No, I know. I'm just. I've done quite a bit of thinking in this area, and it's like that off the shelf, on the shelf thing is a good point, because there are people out there with way more resources than me, and to trailblaze without seeing what's on the shelf and what's being done already and sort of join forces with established roots, that to me seems like the wiser move before just being like, I want to sample the buffet before I start making some new food that's just not necessary, you know? Because I know the collaborative power of people, and if I can contribute to a main vein that's already bringing beauty into the world, then it's just, I think there's a cumulative effect. I think I could do more good in a positive setting that's been established than I could just trying to make my own. And you know, that's situational, right? Like, if there is a very niche problem that no one's done before, then that's one thing. But I'm very curious about the philosophies and actions that are being done out there that just are desperate for help, you know?
I mean, yes, but people have weird one-off ideas, right? Like Uber. Right. I mean, I thought about that a million times, nobody implemented it, and then suddenly, boom, there's, you know, your car is a taxi from now on. And also there's the opposite. I don't know if you noticed, but somebody drove by with a very loud machine a moment ago, right? That person's a one-man disruption zone, right? He's just, I'm going to disrupt everything right now, you know? So one guy can be very powerful. If they can be that powerful disruptively, they can be that powerful in the opposite direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point.
So these are things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good point, because it's a lot of what I'm trying to do in my personal life. It's like, I'm just like, how can I see the best and bring forth the best part of myself that I can that impacts people? Because I've tasted it, you know?
Me too.
I've tasted what it really is like to help someone, and it comes from a place that's, I'm not asking for anything. And yet, you know, I can only act from the lowest common denominator of myself, it seems, because even if I act selflessly, there are these parts of me that I notice that are just like hungry, you know, just malicious.
I don't know if they're malicious, they're voracious.
Voracious, yeah.
Right.
And they're rooted in fear and, you know, and I'm curious about the...
But I mean, virtue is an attractive consort, right? So we're just going to pretend that desirelessly we can, you know, go forth and be brilliant and amazing without any sense of... It's not like I do things... I noticed when I was young that there was a natural way to be kind and gentle and loving to other beings. That seemed, when I say natural, I meant comes naturally to me. But I also noticed later that once I was introduced to the, like, you give, you get, right? You take, we take. Once I was introduced to that thing, still the other way was even better, right? It was like, if I want something, what I get from selfless care for another is a feeling of beauty inside my heart. Yeah. So should I feel guilty about having that response to having been, you know, generous or kind or companioning with someone who's in a crisis or whatever? Yeah, I could.
Yes. I mean, that's where I'm running into things like filling my cup for others, because I notice that often I'm like depleted, and then I'm still trying to be selfless, and it's just fucking me up.
Okay, that's a huge problem, because now we're entering into the topic that I would call displacement, which is I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not getting taken care of, so I'm going to take care of others in the hopes that my needs will somehow be magically met because I'm such an amazing force in the world, and so if I take care of them when they're in need, I'll be taken care of when I'm in need or something. But what that doesn't address, like, if I have a 4-alarm fire inside my body or my spirit or something, my psyche, whatever, and it's not getting any care, I can give all. Yeah, this is the shoes of the shoemaker problem, right? Like, he's wearing these beat up, you know, scabby olds. He's fixing everybody's shoes. They look perfect. You know, every person who comes to him, he's like, oh yeah, pay me later, you know. But he's not getting taken care of, or she. So that is a real problem. Perhaps we are close to winding up here.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But there's one more topic I'd like to briefly introduce, which is one that we spoke of last night. We talked about, you gave a story. Do you want to tell the story of the deer?
The deer?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Autobiography of a Yogi, which has been a book that I'm slowly filtering through, and it's... I have so many questions just because of that book. But he talks about... he has a group of followers, and they're young kids, and they have this baby deer that they're taking care of. It's like a pet. And he leaves to go on a trip and says, "Don't feed the baby deer. Wait until I come back." And one of the kids feeds the baby deer, and it becomes deathly ill because it was overfed and it's basically on the verge of dying. And he prays and pours his love into, and just like, "God, please save this deer." And slowly and surely it recovers. And then it comes to him in a dream that night, and it's basically like, "Please, like, let me go. Like, it's my time to move on and go on to another life. And you're keeping me here." And so the deer falls ill again, and this time, they let it go. They let it fade away. And that, to me, I'm asking all these questions about death, and here the story is the next day in this book that I'm reading, and it's very interesting to me. And that kind of sparked a conversation between you and I. It's like, yes, perhaps there's the impacts of that story, but then there's also, like, if a being comes to you and asks for help, that is like, you don't go, "You're gonna die, all things are gonna die, goodbye." Like, you help the being, of course. It's like, I don't even have to think about it. There's a deep impulse that wants to help something in need that's asking for it. And I think there's an interesting interplay between the two.
So yesterday when you presented this to me, I became somewhat militant.
Yes.
I got very intense. And I'm going to resist that urge today, but I just want to highlight something very weird. There's a lot of really strange things about being human.
Well, if you're not going to be militant, someone will.
I guess so. He's saying again, one more time, again. Pull my fucking something, again, one more time.
Well.
So, there's a lot of really weird things about being human, as was just synchronistically demonstrated. But one of the most astonishing things about being human is that around here, we have all these myths about human supremacy and our distinction from nature and our ability to control nature and being above nature and outside of nature and all of these things. And a lot of that stuff is really dangerously lethal nonsense, because there's no way to be separate from nature. There's no way to be above nature. There are ways to attack street signs in the afternoon outside my house, as if they were monsters and you were tilting at windmills. But which is another very artificial thing that can happen. So my point was that it's very weird to be human. And I had a couple of points I wanted us to notice. And the first was that the wisdom stories of gurus and elders and so on can be very compelling, and they can lead us into the belief that we now know how to be or what to do. And so one of the things that you just said was, this doesn't mean that every time a being is on the verge of death or is suffering or is ill or is injured or something, we should just let it be, because that's a natural thing to do. We talked about this during the Extinctionati meeting. This is the idea of non-interference, right? Meaning, like, if I want to be liberated, I need to be unattached to the happenings in the world around me and literally be in a state of non-action. This is known as not attempting to change anything. Do not become attached to changing things. This is a common thing in monastic traditions. Non-attachment means not changing. Now, I've heard one interesting version.
I don't know if that's true. Please
Oh,
continue, but I
okay.
really don't think that's true.
I don't want to form up against you too severely, but I absolutely promise you that it is doctrinally a fact. You will be trained in this doctrine.
That I can understand, but
Okay.
I don't think that attachment is this. I don't think non-attachment means that you don't make changes or you aren't a part of changes.
In many traditions, this is part of the monastic path. Do not attach to anything enough to intervene or attempt to change it.
Cool.
Now, this is a principle. It's not a law. But we could become very confused by this. One of the interesting inversions of this that I heard was Aitken Roshi, my first teacher's lineage teacher, John Tarrant Roshi's teacher, once said, if you love someone, don't change that. No matter what. Just don't change it. Right? Which is a really interesting twist on the non-interference idea. So what I'm trying to get at is we hear these stories from gurus and elders and wisdom teachers and Joseph Campbell and Jung and who knows who, right? And a lot of those stories are beautiful and profound. They can be very enlightening, but we should be careful to take them as prescriptions for what we're supposed to do. In the sense that I'm not a guru, I'm not enlightened, I'm a human being swimming around in the sewage of my own confusion. It's probably not right. I'm going to get it wrong if I try to do the things that are, prescribed by enlightened folk and so on. I'm going to mess it up. And one of the Extinctionati members, as an illustration of this, told the story of the two monks. They're walking through the forest. They're supposed to be non-attached, right? This is the goal. Don't attach to things. And also, it's strictly prohibited to have anything to do with women, because that's a huge problem. Anything to do with women just binds you up with karma. I don't know why it's women that bind you up with karma. We should examine that in a later episode. But anyway, they're walking through the forest. There's a woman. She's got to get across the stream. She can't do it. She's all dressed nicely, and she can't swim, and she can't take off her clothing and be naked either. So one of the monks just picks her up and carries her across the stream, and then they continue on. He sets her down. The monk said, you violated the precepts. The other monk says, what do you mean? I didn't do anything. And the first monk says, you touched a woman. You carried her. You were, her breasts were resting against your cheeks. And the first monk says, well, I set her down back there. Why are you still carrying her? And so this is the thing. What this implies is that non-attachment isn't... Okay. Non-attachment isn't doctrinal. It's not a law. It's a very strange thing. It is that if you are established in the absence, in the void, in the negation of being an attachment, if you are established in the negation, this is where your non-isness dwells, then you can safely descend into all manner of human and situational situations,
right.
And you will neither be bound up in them, nor will you create karma. Now, what we're doing right here is talking, and that's a very dangerous thing to do, and I acknowledge that. And this has also been treated carefully in the koans and the wisdom traditions, right? The difference between talking about things and actual non-attachment. But we can see, even intellectually here, that if you are established in non-selfness, you can descend safely into language, concept, relation, worldly things, and then just you won't be trapped in them. Yeah. But if you are not established there, you are very likely to be trapped in them, right?
Yeah. And you can be attached to non-attachment.
Exactly, as the second monk apparently was, right? He's attached to the idea of non-attachment.
Yep.
So the second monk has put on a third hat, right? You're supposed to take all the hats off.
Yep.
The second monk is busy putting hats on and thinking, this is what I know what's supposed to happen here, and da-da-dee-da-da-dee, blah-blah-blah. So this is a very important concept as relates to, do we intervene in the suffering and or death of others or the karma of others? Because there are many situations where you get in a big mess by intervening in someone else's karma. And I have recently come to understand this from my own very near term behavior. Okay, so now the last thing that I want to say, and there will be more time for you to opine or question things, is that we humans are weird. We are the one animal that has the capacity to rescue other animals from the brink of death and each other. And that's a weird power. It's a godlike, angelic power around here. There are other animals that can do very modest things. You know, the mother could maybe pull their cub away from a beehive where it's getting, stung to death, and then maybe lick it and pull out some of the stingers or something. But if any animal is injured in such a way that it's not going to heal and it's just going to die, only the humans can save them, and that's a very important thing we should notice. In a very strange sense, whether God dictated it or not, it doesn't matter. We are, in a sense, the summation lens of the life forms around here. We are the one creature that has the capacity to rescue beings from the brink of death, to actively nurture them in very complex and elaborate ways, almost as if we were gods or angels. And ironically, that is the very power that, inverted at the level of our species, is world-ending. We are the worst thing you can possibly imagine. I mean, it's hard to imagine anything as devastatingly horrific as the human species in a living ecology. It just rips things to shreds for no reason and builds billions of little death objects everywhere. Like, it makes cancer look like Playdate, So it's very strange that we have both of these things, and at the species level, it's blatantly obvious that we are malignantly horrific, whereas at the individual or small group level, we can be profoundly beautiful or angelic if morals and ethics have any sort of basis. So, but yeah, I just wanted to notice, we are the one with the power to intervene, and that's a power that we should honor, I think, and be aware of. We should not make us proud or hubristic. But we should humbly recognize that we are endowed with the capacity to intervene at the brink of death. And if an animal, we can intervene both ways, right? If an animal is so horrifically ill or injured, or it is in fact somehow its destiny to die now, they can call to us and we can bring them to a quick and hopefully relatively painless end. But if they hope for survival and want to heal and go on living, and maybe they have children or something, then we can also be the pivot between those states.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think as far as I can tell, compassion lies within us, even through non-attachment. It truly just forms in the absence of not clinging to things or being strongly averse to them.
Yes. Here's what I've never seen, and there's probably stories of this because we have stories of everything. I've never seen an enlightened being that just goes around slaughtering people and torturing them and eating their faces and crushing their children and burning their animals up. Yeah, I've never seen an enlightened being going I'm just going to be,
I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen an enlightened being and was able to recognize that.
I don't know, myself. So I have my Zen teachers. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to comment at length about them, but John Tarrant Roshi, I think he's cut through the mind.
Yeah.
But that tree in the garden that we walk around.
Yep. Knows what's going on?
I mean, I think if you mean an enlightened being, but if what you mean by an enlightened being is a human who's enlightened, that's uncommon.
Right.
But in nature, I think there are many beings who are enlightened, and we just don't notice them because they don't come up and tap us on the shoulder and go, "Hey Nathan, would you like to shine?"
I'd love that if they did.
I'd love some of them will.
Tapped on the forehead and just shown the galaxy. That would be sweet, man.
Well, it's something that can happen quite unexpectedly.
I'm open and ready to receive.
I thought I had to go like to South America and find, Castaneda's teacher and whatever, and then he was gonna. I had no idea that something from another universe was gonna come tap me on the shoulder, sitting here in this chair at this desk in 2002. But that seems to be what happened. I'm not claiming that enlightened me, but it certainly changed everything I thought about anything forever. But yeah, there are, and also praying mantises. You want to encounter enlightened being? Just hang out with a mantis. You're going to find there's some crazy stuff going on there that the humans have. There's no narrative that can possibly encompass it.
Yeah.
Those little creatures they're like from 5 other universes at once. And I'm pretty sure octopuses are similar, and there are other creatures who are also similar,
Oh my God. Well, I say it's a good run.
Let us honor and remember all the beings who have struggled for the liberation and the rescue of each other, their children, their progeny, this world and the future, the beings who dwell in beauty and wisdom and insight, who inspire us and draw us toward our capacities to embody joy and wonder, learning, anamnesis, mutual concern and rescue, healing, insight, and play.
And thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Nathan. That was fascinatingly brilliant.